The sun was merciless that afternoon. Heat shimmered off the blacktop of a crowded strip mall parking lot in a small southern town. Car doors slammed, grocery carts rattled, and somewhere in the background a child laughed. It was an ordinary American Saturday, until a single voice cut through the air like a knife. "Step out of the vehicle, now!" Heads turned. A white police officer, jaw clenched tight, one hand resting on his holster, had zeroed in on a black man climbing out of a dark SUV. The officer's tone wasn't routine. It was sharp, hostile, already dripping with suspicion. Shoppers slowed their steps, drawn to the spectacle, their phones itching in their palms. The man he confronted wasn't loud, wasn't frantic. He wore a fitted black t-shirt and faded jeans, the kind of outfit anyone might throw on before running errands. But his posture, calm, steady, unshaken, hinted at something beneath the surface. "What's the problem, officer?" he asked, his voice low, even. The cop smirked. "Problem is, you and this vehicle don't match. Plates come back clean, but I don't buy it. Let's see some ID before this escalates." Escalates. The word echoed. People nearby felt a sudden heaviness settle over the lot. They had seen this scene before, too many times. A black man accused of looking out of place. An officer daring him to slip, to twitch, to give a reason. The man did not twitch, he did not flinch. Instead, he raised his eyes and held the cop's stare with the quiet intensity of someone who had been under fire before, real fire. Because what no one here knew, not yet, was that this wasn't just another shopper. His name was Marcus Kane. He was 38 years old, and until 2 years ago, he had worn the trident of a United States Navy SEAL, one of the most feared and respected special operations units in the world. He had fought in deserts where the ground shook with artillery. He had dragged bleeding teammates out of ambushes. He had stared down men who would rather die than surrender. He had already lived through battles this officer could not imagine. But here, in a supermarket parking lot, in front of his own neighbors, none of that mattered. To this cop, he was just another black man to push around. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising, camera phones lifting. Every second ticked louder, more dangerous. The officer's hand hovered closer to his weapon, and still, Marcus Kane did not move. He simply said quietly, "Be careful what you start." Those words hung in the air, colder than the gunmetal on the officer's hip. And in the next few seconds, everything this cop thought he controlled, his authority, his power, his badge, would unravel in front of everyone. Because you can harass a man in public. But when that man is a Navy SEAL, trained to face the impossible, the tables don't just turn, they flip instantly. Marcus Kane had never asked for recognition. He didn't keep medals on display in his living room. No framed photographs of dusty battlefields hung on the walls of his modest home. If you walked past him in a grocery store, you would assume he was just another man juggling errands, family, and the weight of daily life. And that was exactly how he preferred it. But beneath the quiet exterior was a history most could barely imagine. Kane had joined the Navy straight out of high school, pushed by a desire to escape the small-town limits of Alabama. What started as a boy's attempt to carve out a future became a calling. He earned his place in the Navy SEALs, surviving Hell Week, freezing surf torture, endless drills that broke men twice his size. He didn't just survive, he excelled. His teammates remembered him as unshakable under pressure. In Kandahar, he had pulled a wounded medic from the line of fire while rounds snapped past his helmet. In Fallujah, he had cleared a building alone after his squad was pinned down. He carried scars on his back and shrapnel deep in his thigh that still ached when the weather turned cold. But the weight of war and the weight of secrecy eventually wore him down. After nearly 2 decades of service, Kane retired, trading combat boots for sneakers and camouflage for jeans. He bought a modest home near his wife's family, in a southern suburb where neighbors waved from their porches and kids rode bikes until sunset. He wanted peace. Yet peace had a fragile edge in towns like this. The community looked postcard perfect, but under the surface, old prejudices clung tight. Black families like the Canes noticed the extra glances when they drove newer cars, the slower service in certain stores, the way patrol cars circled their block more often than others. Kane's wife, Danielle, worried most about their children, two young kids with bright eyes and boundless energy. They deserve to grow up without being treated as suspects, she often said. Kane agreed. That was why he stayed calm, why he kept his voice measured, even when confronted. On that sweltering Saturday afternoon, his errands were simple. Grab groceries for the week, pick up supplies for the backyard barbecue his family planned. Nothing about his day suggested confrontation. Nothing about his life at that moment hinted at violence. But prejudice doesn't wait for the right time. It waits for the wrong one. And when Officer Randall spotted Kane's black SUV pulling into the strip mall, he was known as strict on patrols, a man who leaned on authority like a crutch. Among black residents, he was known for something else. Harassment dressed up as routine policing. Traffic stops for dim tail lights that weren't dim. Questioning teenagers for loitering while they waited for rides. It was a pattern, one the department quietly ignored. That afternoon, when Randall saw Kane park his SUV, his suspicion clicked into place before he even ran the plates. A black man in a late-model vehicle, alone, carrying himself with too much confidence. Randall's mind twisted those into justification. He pulled his cruiser across the aisle, lights flashing. Shoppers froze, some muttering, some rolling their eyes. It was a scene they'd witnessed too often. A white officer stopping a black man for little more than existing in the wrong space. Randall approached fast, hand hovering near his weapon, body language screaming confrontation. He didn't ask politely. He barked, "Step out of the car!" Kane glanced at him through the window, calm but steady. He switched off the engine, placed his hands deliberately on the wheel, and waited until Randall was closer. Years of military discipline guided every movement. "What's the issue, officer?" Kane asked. His voice carried no anger, no fear, just patience, an unsettling patience that made Randall scowl. "The issue," Randall said loudly, for the bystanders to hear, "is that you don't look like the owner of this vehicle. Plate's clean, but that doesn't mean anything. Mind stepping out so I can check for myself?" The words dripped with implication. "You don't look like the owner." A phrase sharpened by years of profiling. Several shoppers paused, phones in hand, eyebrows raised. They had heard this before. Kane sighed softly and opened the door, stepping out with deliberate calm. His frame was tall, muscular, the kind of build that comes from years of relentless training. He wasn't trying to intimidate, but his presence alone unsettled the officer. Randall's jaw tightened as if the sight of strength itself was a challenge. "Hands where I can see them," Randall barked, louder this time. His hand twitched closer to his holster. Kane complied, raising his palm slightly. The crowd inched closer, sensing something boiling. A woman whispered, "He hasn't done anything." Another man muttered, "This is getting out of hand." Randall leaned in, eyes narrowing. "What's your name?" "Marcus Kane." Randall smirked, jotting it down. "Got ID on you?" "Yes, wallet's in my back pocket. I'll move slow." Kane's caution wasn't weakness. It was survival. Every motion rehearsed, controlled. He reached back, handed over his ID. Randall glanced at it, lips curling. "Military, huh? That what you're gonna claim? Retired?" The sarcasm was heavy, designed to provoke. Kane met his eyes, steady as stone. "I don't claim. I served." The words landed like a weight in the air, though Randall brushed them off with a scoff. Around them, more phones came up, recording. The scene had grown too loud, too charged to ignore. Randall raised his voice, addressing Kane as if he were already guilty. "Step over to the front of the vehicle. Lean on the hood. Let's make this easy." Kane tilted his head, the faintest trace of steel entering his gaze. "Easy for who, officer?" The silence that followed was razor sharp. For the first time, a ripple of doubt spread through the onlookers. This wasn't just another man being hassled. Something about his voice, his control, suggested deeper strength. And yet Randall pushed forward, unaware that in trying to break a man, he had just lit the fuse of something much bigger. The officer's voice boomed across the parking lot, sharper this time, demanding obedience as if the badge on his chest gave him the right to invent crimes in plain sight. "On the hood! Now!" he barked, and with a rough shove, he forced Marcus Kane against the gleaming surface of the SUV. The sound of metal rang out, drawing gasps from shoppers frozen in mid-stride. Some raised their phones higher, capturing not resistance, but the unmistakable image of a man being handled like a suspect when all he had done was shop for groceries. Randall's tone carried the arrogance of someone who believed that if he shouted loud enough, people would accept his version of events over their own eyes. "Non-compliant," he muttered loudly, as though narrating to an invisible jury, acting suspicious. Yet the camera lenses told the opposite story. A calm, disciplined man being harassed without cause. The crowd's discomfort turned to agitation. A woman's voice rose above the murmur, "He hasn't done anything." Another man, older, shook his head and muttered, "This is ridiculous." More voices joined, the atmosphere thickening with tension. Randall misread the rising outrage as defiance against him rather than defense of the truth. Grabbing his radio, he called for backup, spitting clipped words designed to escalate. "Suspicious suspect, resisting. Need units now." Sirens had not yet arrived, but the words alone heightened the sense of danger. Kane could feel the shift in the air, the same rhythm he had sensed in combat zones when chaos was seconds away. He inhaled slowly, the controlled breath of a man trained to hold steady when everyone else lost balance. Randall's hand twitched closer to his holster, and the crowd erupted in overlapping cries. "Don't you dare! He's unarmed! We're filming this!" It was a scene the country had witnessed too many times, another spark in a field of dry grass. Randall seized Kane's wrist roughly, jerking it toward a pair of cuffs, eager to stamp authority on the situation before the crowd's opinion hardened against him. For the first time, Marcus spoke, his voice calm, even, yet edged with steel. "You don't want to do this." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't pleading. It was a statement of fact, delivered by someone who had stood in doorways where enemies waited with rifles and explosives, someone who knew the difference between real threats and imagined power plays. The grip on his wrist faltered just for a second, but Randall pressed harder, desperate not to show hesitation. Then Kane straightened slightly, enough to shift the dynamic. His voice carried now not just to Randall but to everyone watching. "I've fought enemies overseas who showed me more respect than this." The sentence cut through the noise like a blade. Phones held higher. Eyes widened. People stopped muttering and simply stared. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't performance. It was truth, heavy and undeniable, the kind of truth that redefined what the scene really was. This wasn't a dangerous suspect. This was a man who had bled for the country being treated like a criminal in front of his own neighbors. Silence rippled across the lot. The officer stiffened, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest, but the crowd had already shifted. From the back, an older man in a faded Marine Corps cap stepped forward. His voice cracked with disbelief and recognition. "Wait a damn minute. I know him. That's Kane. Marcus Kane. He was with SEAL Team 4. The words dropped like lightning into the gathering storm. Heads turned, whispers surged into shouts. "Are you serious? That's a Navy SEAL? You're harassing a war hero!" The balance tipped in an instant. Randall blinked, the certainty in his posture wobbling as if the ground itself had shifted. The cuffs in his hand suddenly felt like dead weight. The crowd, once uncertain, now roared with righteous fury. A mother clutching her child screamed, "You're arresting a veteran!" Another man pointed his phone squarely at the officer's face. "This is going viral tonight." The tide was irreversible. Marcus Kane did not gloat, did not smirk, did not even speak. He stood motionless, radiating a quiet authority that eclipsed the badge in front of him. His silence was louder than the officer's commands, louder than the sirens in the distance, louder than the fear clawing at Randall's throat. The man had entered the lot as just another shopper. Now everyone knew they were staring at something far greater, a decorated Navy SEAL being humiliated by a cop too blinded by prejudice to see the storm he had unleashed. The name spread through the crowd like a current. Marcus Kane, Navy SEAL. A hush fell as people processed what that meant. The officer's grip faltered, his bravado cracking, but instead of stepping back, he doubled down, barking louder to cover the tremor in his voice. "I don't care who you are. You comply when I give an order." He tried to shove Kane flat against the hood again, but the momentum had shifted. The crowd no longer saw an uncooperative suspect. They saw a decorated warrior being humiliated in a supermarket parking lot. Phones tilted higher, recording every twitch of Randall's jaw, every glint of sweat running down his temple. And Marcus, still calm, turned his head slightly and spoke, not to the officer but to everyone listening. "I bled for this country. I buried brothers under its flag, and this is how you treat the people who fight for you?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder across the lot. Randall's radio crackled as backup units pulled in, sirens wailing. 2 more cruisers screeched to a stop, officers piling out with hands on their weapons, the scene escalating from absurd to dangerous in a matter of seconds. But the crowd wasn't intimidated. They roared louder, shouting for the officers to stand down. "He's Navy SEAL! He's a veteran! Put your guns away!" The tension snapped higher, cameras catching every second, the line between authority and mob unraveling. Kane raised his palms calmly, his composure unnerving even the new arrivals. He didn't flinch when one officer shouted at him to get on the ground. Instead, he fixed them with a gaze cold as steel and said, "You're aiming at the wrong enemy." The words hit like a slap. One of the younger officers, barely out of academy, hesitated, lowering his weapon slightly as doubt spread across his face. The veteran in the cap shouted again, his voice breaking with emotion. "I served in Iraq with men who spoke his name. He's a damn hero, and you're treating him like a criminal." The tide surged harder. The officers looked at one another, uncertainty creeping into their rigid stances, while Randall's face flushed red with fury. He barked orders, desperate to regain control, but every word rang hollow against the rising chorus of protest and the steady camera lenses broadcasting his every move to the world. Then it happened. Kane shifted just enough to lock eyes with Randall, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. "You're done here." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sentence carried the weight of battlefield authority, the kind that makes men stop in their tracks. And in that instant, the spell of false power shattered. Randall's hand fell away from his holster. The backup officers stepped back, none of them willing to shoulder the disgrace of arresting a Navy SEAL under the eyes of an entire town. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some cursing the officer, all of them united in the knowledge they had witnessed something irreversible. Randall tried to bluster, muttering about procedure, about following protocol, but his voice was drowned out by the jeers. The man he had tried to humiliate stood tall, free, untouchable, his very presence silencing the storm. Marcus Kane didn't need to fight, didn't need to raise a fist. He had endured worse, faced death itself, and the calm in his eyes told everyone watching that this petty display of power, was nothing. The officer had come looking for dominance. Instead, he had exposed his own weakness in front of the world, and within hours, the video would spread, millions watching a racist cop unravel in the face of a man who had already proved his worth in blood and sacrifice. Marcus turned away from the squad cars, straightened his shirt, and with the quiet dignity of a man who knew who he was, walked back toward his vehicle. The badge no longer held power. Respect did. And on that sweltering southern afternoon, justice arrived not with fists or weapons, but with truth so undeniable it silenced the entire lot. The stillness after the veteran's shout was like a gunshot in the air. Everyone knew the truth now. The man being shoved and humiliated wasn't some random suspect, wasn't a stranger with something to hide. He was Marcus Kane, a Navy SEAL whose name carried more weight in one breath than Randall's badge ever could. And in that moment, the crowd stopped being passive. They surged forward with voices that cut sharper than sirens. "Get your hands off him! You're finished, officer!" The tide rolled in heavy, and no matter how Randall tried to bark commands, the sound of his own authority drowned beneath the roar of dozens who knew they had witnessed a line being crossed. Randall's backup officers froze. They had arrived ready to follow orders, but now they were trapped in a spectacle they could not control. Cameras were in their faces. Voices shouted their every move, and the man they had been told was suspicious stood steady as stone, while a growing crowd declared him a hero. One of the younger cops lowered his weapon outright, stepping back as if the weight of the truth pressed too hard against his conscience. The others hesitated, exchanging looks that betrayed the same thought. "We can't touch him now." Randall saw it slipping away. The control, the fear, the illusion of power, gone. He screamed at Kane again, desperate to claw back the moment. "On the ground! Now!" But his words no longer landed. Kane didn't move. He lifted his head and met the officer's glare with a calm that burned hotter than rage. His voice dropped into the kind of tone only a warrior could summon, low and cold, every syllable a verdict. "You just lost everything." The crowd erupted, cheering and shouting, drowning out Randall's sputtering protests. They pushed closer, forming a human wall between the officer and Kane, some raising their phones inches from Randall's face, capturing his every twitch of panic. "Smile for the camera, tough guy!" one man shouted. A woman snapped, "That's what you get when you mess with the wrong man!" The humiliation spread faster than fire. Randall's face flushed crimson as his own colleagues pulled him back, not to protect Kane, but to save what was left of the department's skin. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His silence said it all. The man who had been shoved, cuffed, and nearly threatened with a weapon was now the only figure in the lot who stood with true authority. He rolled his shoulders back, straightened his shirt, and looked out over the faces of his neighbors. For the first time, they weren't seeing just a man buying groceries. They were seeing exactly who he was. A warrior, a protector, a father, and a citizen who demanded respect without lifting a single fist. And the response was instant. People clapped, some raised their fists in solidarity, others shouted his name. "Kane! Kane! Kane!" The chant grew, echoing across the lot until it was impossible to ignore. The badge had lost its shine, the uniform had lost its shield, and in its place rose the undeniable truth. Respect isn't given because of a title. Respect is earned, and Marcus Kane had earned more than any man in uniform around him. Randall tried one last desperate swing at authority. "This isn't over," he spat, pointing a trembling finger as though his words could erase what had just unfolded. But no one listened. His colleagues turned their backs, the crowd jeered, and Kane simply tilted his head with the faintest trace of pity. "You're right," he said evenly. "It isn't over. It's just over for you." That single line ended it. The cheers roared louder than the summer heat. Phones recorded the smirk fading from Randall's lips as he realized the truth. His career, his pride, his false sense of control had evaporated in front of everyone. He would be remembered, yes, but not as a hero, not even as an officer. He would be remembered as the man who tried to break a Navy SEAL and instead broke himself. Kane walked away without looking back. He didn't need to. The sound of voices rising behind him was victory enough. Parents told their children to remember what they had seen. Veterans saluted from the edge of the crowd. Even strangers felt pride swell in their chests, knowing they had stood witness to arrogance being shattered in real time. And Randall, left behind, stood in the wreckage of his own making, stripped of authority, exposed under the unforgiving light of justice. That was the twist. Not a courtroom, not headlines, not lawyers or judges. Justice had come in seconds, delivered by truth too heavy to deny and a crowd unwilling to let lies survive. The cop who thought he could harass and intimidate had been shut down on the spot. His downfall written in the cheers of people who saw through the badge to the man behind it. And the response? Pure, unfiltered satisfaction. Marcus Kane had walked away with his dignity intact, his reputation stronger, and his silence louder than any speech could ever be. Randall had walked into that lot with arrogance. He left with nothing. When Marcus Kane walked back to his porch that night, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. Not the exhaustion of combat, but the heaviness of realizing that even after serving his country, he could still be treated like a suspect in front of his own neighbors. His kids ran to him as if nothing had happened, their laughter pure and unbroken. That was his victory, preserving their innocence a little longer. Sitting there with Danielle's hand in his, Marcus knew his real mission wasn't behind enemy lines anymore. It was here, at home, making sure his children grew up in a country that saw them for who they were, not for what others feared. Strength, he realized, wasn't about how many battles you won. It was about the dignity you refused to lose. He had faced down an officer's arrogance the same way he once faced gunfire, steady, calm, unshaken. And by doing nothing more than standing tall, he had already won. The cop left in disgrace. Kane walked away with what mattered: his honor, his family, his peace. And as the sun sank low, he thought of one simple truth. Some fights are not fought with fists or weapons. They're fought by refusing to bow your head, by holding on to respect when someone tries to take it. From my perspective, that's the part that stays with me. We live in a country where a man who risked everything for the flag could be treated like he didn't belong under it. That should make us angry. But what inspires me is the way Marcus responded. No yelling, no fists, no rage, just quiet strength. And sometimes, that's the loudest message of all. So I'll leave you with this. Dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. Marcus never surrendered his, and neither should we. If you believe in stories that expose the truth and honor those who stand tall against injustice, subscribe to this channel. Because here, we're not just telling stories. We're reminding the world what justice really looks like.